Okay, so welcome to our podcast. We have our guest today, Clement Jin. So I think I've wrongly accented your name. So let us him introduce himself to us, and we are going to get started with our questions. So
Yeah,
Clement, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so how do I pronounce your name again?
Clément
Clement Jean,
Jean.
right? Jean. Okay.
Yeah.
So what are you currently working? Can you tell us something about yourself?
So right now I'm based in China, and I'm mostly working on my own company, which is providing um, like courses and digital content or even books about Protobuf and the gRPC. So that's mainly what I'm doing. And then on the side, I'm also helping an organization called Education for Ethiopia. And I'm helping them doing decisions regarding technology.
How you first introduced with Ethiopia, like basically.
So basically, I know the CEO, um, Lina, which was she was like my classmate in China. So basically, at some point, she decided to introduce her project um, to the class, and I thought that this was like really interesting. So at first, it was like mostly YouTube channel. So on the YouTube channel, they would have like courses on math, like all the sciences, and maybe some languages like Chinese, for example. And so I thought this was interesting and that we could take it to the next level. Um, because the idea was that in Ethiopia, the rural population wouldn't have access to like reliable internet and maybe electricity. So we thought about an idea of basically using Raspberry Pi, and this Raspberry Pi would basically contain all the videos for the courses. And with that, basically people could connect with their phone to the hotspot provided by the Raspberry Pi, and they could download the videos on their phone and then go back home and watch the videos. So that was the first idea that we got together to make it a little bit better. So we started to do that. We started to introduce it to I think this was the ambassador of Ethiopia in China. We started to present the idea. But actually, this idea never got further than that because, as it turns out, Ethiopia is developing quite fast. And now, internet and the mobile data is like way better than it was 5 years ago. And so now, basically, it's kind of back to the YouTube channel and a website where you can basically see all the playlists um, for the courses. So yeah, that was how I got introduced to like the education system in Ethiopia and Ethiopia and education for Ethiopia.
Okay, I think like mm, for me, I have been in rural place in which there was no internet and it's hard
Mhm.
to get even electricity.
Yeah,
So even currently in Ethiopia, there are many places in which we struggle to have these technologies. There are many people who didn't even see what is a bulb, like light bulb. They just have
for sure.
been, yeah, using a kind of lights or something that like that based on fire. Like I think this will be a really very helpful thing. Even if the internet and the electricity is expanding, there are some rural families in which there are genius guys. In if we provide them these kind of things, they can learn and
Mhm.
teach themselves accordingly. So I think it was a good idea if you guys like continued on with well, because having a websites or kind of thing is makes it accessible for guys in the city,
Yeah.
not the rural areas. So I think it is a good idea. So you have been, have you ever visited Ethiopia s- in
So
this?
yeah, first of all, on the point you made, I think like I'm not saying that all of the problems are solved. Um,
Yeah.
we also had like some problems of basically like if a Raspberry Pi is dead in rural areas, like we
Yeah.
need to go back there, like get a new Raspberry Pi or try to help them to like repair the Raspberry Pi and all this kind of stuff. So we also had a logistic problem, and so we focused more on the city first and try to develop it in the cities, and then maybe later on try again in the rural areas. And then, unfortunately, I didn't get the chance to go to Ethiopia right now because mostly because of schedule conflicts. So when the CEO is going back, I maybe don't have time, and when I have time, she doesn't have time to go back. So yeah, never had
Okay,
the chance.
so I think I should teach you some word to say hi
Okay,
in Ethiopian.
okay.
So to say hi in Ethiopian, you have to say salam now.
Salam
Salam,
no, salam.
yeah, salam no.
Okay, salam no.
Yeah. So let me get you back uh, to your childhood. Like how was your childhood? How you grown? How was your school status? What
Mhm.
are things that make you more interested in? What are more activities that you were engaged in?
Okay. So I come from the south of France, and I come from a village which has like just 400 people. Um, so it's quite a small village. Um, and so in this village, we had like the primary school and the middle school. And then if you want to go to high school and university, you basically need to go to another city. Um, so I basically spent my primary school and middle school there. Then I went to like a bigger city for high school, and then again in another bigger city for university. For my status at school, I think I was always a good student, like above average student, let's say. Not like the top student, but above average. Um, and I think the main skill that I add is like a good memory. So I never really did my homeworks. Um, it's like I could just remember everything that the teacher said, and so like I was just going to the exam and pass the exam quite easily because I could remember. Um, Unfortunately, it has also a bad side. So I was not spending a lot of effort, right? Um, and I could pass the exam, but after the exam was done, I basically forgot everything because I didn't like do the homeworks and practice and practice and practice. So yeah, it has some good sides and some bad sides.
Yeah, I think like most of the people who were not studying in the high school or something like that face a little bit challenge in the college, right? When you
Mm,
get big and when you have to study, you don't know how to study and what are the
right,
techniques are there, and you
right.
don't know what is the difficulties that you may face.
Mm.
So basically, I think that was a good status of your life, like not studying or something like that. But what are the hobbies that you were engaged in? Like, if you
Oh yeah,
have some spare times.
yeah. So outside of school, I would mostly play football. Um, my dream was to make it as a professional football player. Unfortunately, I never had the level to pass this to go to professional. But yeah, in high school, I was in a small formation center. And in this formation center, we would like practice 3 or 4 times per week and then play during the weekend. So it was taking quite a lot of time. And actually, like the last year of high school, I decided to focus more on school than the football, and so I decided to just drop and focus a little bit more on school.
Okay, I was kind of like interested in football when I was in elementary school, I think, and due to some pressures from family and other things, I stopped.
The thing is, I was quite lucky because like my parents would like support me, but at some point it was taking so much like energy and so much time that I couldn't focus on school anymore. So I had to make a choice, basically. Yeah.
What was your favorite subject? Do you remember?
My favorite subject at school?
Yeah.
So like outside of sport, something that I quite like is like biology.
Okay.
I don't really know why. I just think it's because it's kind of like a little bit more concrete. So if you look at math or physics, etc.,
Yeah.
it's a little bit harder to see the real effect in life. But biology, somehow it felt a little bit more practical to me. So I kind of like this. And in middle school, we had some classes on, I don't really know how to translate this, but it's basically like technology, and we would like solder some things.
Is it kind of STEM?
Yeah, kind of STEM.
Okay.
STEM, yeah, and I think this was like I really liked working like this on hardware kind of thing. I think it was interesting. Yeah.
So another question to ask you is, I think most of us don't remember what was the time when we first introduced a computer. Do you remember when you first made a computer and you got in touch with it, or even you saw it?
So I think I got introduced to a computer. So it's either at school or maybe at home, but I think like it was at school in primary school. We had a professor who liked to integrate technology with his teaching.
Okay.
And so we would have like a projector, and this would project on a sheet, like a white sheet. And from this, you could have like a pen and write, like digitally write something on the board.
Yeah.
So this was quite nice because you would like highlight some stuff, I don't know, like draw some things, and yeah. So this was like the first memory of something really cool on a computer. That's probably this, and then it's also like video games. So my first video game, I think it was something like Need for Speed or something like this on a computer. Before I played on a Game Boy or something like this. I played Pokemon, Zelda, this kind of games. But on a computer, it was Need for Speed. I don't remember exactly the version. And then in class, we also shared some games called Miniclip. I don't know if you know Miniclip, but it basically, like at that time, it was a website where you can find a lot of games that you can play in the browser. And so we would like basically try to play these games in the browser when we had time at school. So this was, yeah.
Okay. What made you interested in it? Like what kind of things that make you interested in computers?
So like, I think my background is a little bit different from people who like say I started to code at 12 or this kind of thing. For me, at first, a computer was justly a way to chat with friends and play video games. That was mostly it. I never like thought about it about like I can code and create my own video game. This kind of thought never appeared before I started like my university. So before that, it was mostly a practical thing, just to chat with friends and play video games. Yeah, this kind of mundane things, right?
I think we have kind of similar background, I guess. Like for me, it was the same kind of thing till I started in college. So
Yeah.
most of us, like, we think most of the people have started coding when they are children, like age of 5, age of 9, or age
Mhm.
of 12, kind of. But I think there are many people who started even coding after they have turned around 40 or something like that, right?
Right.
So, how was your college journey and how you started computer science and coding?
Okay. So like in high school, um, so the last year of high school, I needed to choose in which university I would go. And so there was like this kind of like job, it's not job fair, but basically like university fair, basically. I don't know how to call it, but basically that's like universities presenting themselves to the student and say like, this is what we are doing in the school. Um, and so I just remember going there with my parents and my brothers and sisters. And I actually didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I didn't have like a dream job, right? Because as I said before, like I wanted to be a professional football player. Uh, that was mostly my life, right? So I never thought about what I could do after. And at some point, I just stumbled upon a school. This is the school that I entered after, and it's called Epitech. And I just remember their booth, and they had kind of like a robot going to the people and talking or asking questions, this kind of stuff. And I thought this was quite interesting, but this was not like what made me go there, right? So it was the hook. So I started to talk to people in the school. And yeah, after talking a little bit, I thought this was quite interesting. I never thought about it before. And the thing that made me really consider going to that school is that you didn't have to apply. So in French, we have like a wish list after we add a wish list after high school, and you would say like what is my first wish, my second wish, my third wish, and then depending on the score that you had at the final exam, you were granted one of these three, or basically you were chosen by another school, right? Um, and the thing is, with this school, they didn't have any requirements like this. So I didn't have to put my wish. They said if you pass the exam, you can just come. And so for me, this was like the final thing that made me really consider this school. And so, yeah, the thing after that is I didn't have any idea what coding was, what Linux was, like all this kind of stuff that when I arrived and I was completely lost. Yeah, that's mostly how I started learning software engineering, and yeah, that's the background.
So basically, like, what has introduced you to coding and who has helped you? I think it's kind of hard, right, to be introduced to Linux, especially if you don't have any background in coding and
Right.
you was every time using Windows. It's kind of hard, right? So, what was your first programming language that you remember, and how you got introduced to it?
Okay. So for the introduction on Linux, there is actually like a funny story. So it's like this school is pretty special, right? There are actually no proper professors. It's actually elder students who help the younger students to learn concepts and etc. And so this school make you buy the computer that you will use for the courses. And with this computer, you go the first day, and they basically hook it up to a server and download a Linux distribution. And then you need to like boot in Linux and start to do your stuff, right? But what happened to me is that the installation didn't go properly. And so I was kind of like locked with a PC that couldn't do anything. And so later on, I went back, installed the stuff, and like you had this screen saying launch. I don't remember which distribution it was, but like launch the distribution, go to the settings, blah 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 blah. I just didn't know how to do all of this. I tried the launch and I tried
Yeah,
to
you were
see what happens.
confused.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But the thing is that the other students, some of the other students already played with that, so I was basically like sticking with people who knew what they were doing. And at some point, I just got the idea, right? Like you open a terminal, you type ls, you type cd, like this kind of stuff. We started to learn some commands, etc. And so, as I said, the school is pretty special. So we use this computer, which has just Linux and Emacs. And after that, for 1 month, there is something called the swimming pool.
Okay.
And this is basically a period of time where each day you have a series of problems that you need to solve. And at the end of the day, at 11:42, you need to submit all the problems, like the solutions for the problems that you have. And depending on that, you get a grade for the day, right? And so, like during that time, it was like basically we were working like 80 hours per week at least, trying to solve all these problems because, like for me, I didn't have any background in programming, and it was in C. I just didn't know anything about like pointers, like memory. Like I just never did that before, and so I was working, yeah, quite hard during that time. Yeah, so C was the first programming language.
Interesting. So you were using Emacs, right? You
Yeah,
you used Emacs at that time?
Oh no, not at all. I mean, you mean if I used Emacs before, or if I was using Emacs to code up the solutions?
Yeah, you were using Emacs to code up the solutions.
Oh yeah. So basically, like they tell you, oh, okay, you have Emacs. This is how you write your code. And to save a file, you do like Control XS, and to get out of Emacs, you do Control XC, and you're out of Emacs. And then they make you use Git to submit the solutions. But basically, at that time, we didn't know anything about Emacs or Git or whatever, right? They just send us in the swimming pool and we need to like swim.
Have you ever used Vim?
So I tried to use Vim. I really like the idea of like the I don't really know the word, but it's like the editing mode and the non-editing mode. I really like the idea. But yeah, because I just started with Emacs, for me this is like the thing that makes more sense right now. But yeah, sure, I tried Vim, I tried NeoVim, I tried to use like different stuff time to time.
Okay, so what is your currently the editor that you are using currently, like most of the time?
Most of the time, still Emacs, I think. I so it's hard. So for courses that I write, I generally tend to use VS Code because I don't want students to like focus on the details of my editor. So I have a basic VS Code white mode and like light mode and everything. I tell them you can install this extension and this extension, and we basically have everything we need. Because I don't want them to like just um, focus on some details, especially for beginners. But when I'm coding for myself, it's mostly Emacs because I have like developed my like basically my configuration and everything, so it's quite comfortable for me.
I think most of us has his favorite editor. For me, like I have used Vim
Okay.
most of the time, but
Mhm.
currently I'm back to VS Code because setting up Vim is becoming a mess currently.
Right.
So, like, have you ever get back to using Windows?
To code, I used Windows only for um, like my course in C Sharp, basically, because I have like VS Code, Visual Studio Code, not Visual Studio Code, sorry, Visual Studio. And at that time, it was only available on Windows. For a short period of time, it was available on Mac. But yeah, after that, I never really coded on Windows.
I think the college has helped you a lot, but
Mm.
I think you were solving kind of problems. Have you ever get back to solving these kind of problems? I think is it more lead code kind, or can we say it's kind of code forces or something like that?
Okay, so for the first month, it was mostly like small problems. So, for example, I remember the first two things. The first thing was print a character on the terminal, right? Like you do a put C and on the terminal. The second is like now we need to print a string up until like a \0 kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So we started like to do a loop and then check if there is a \0 and then do a putC of the current character. This teaches about like ASCII and all this kind of stuff, and loops, etc., etc. So it starts like from the very beginning, put a character on the terminal, and then like the problems were kind of becoming a little bit more logical. I don't remember the problems, but it was maybe like stuff a little bit more like lead code, right? So this was for the first month. And then for the rest of the year, it was mostly project-based. So we had projects like, I remember we needed to write our own printf, for example, our own malloc to understand how malloc works. Yeah, this kind of stuff, like make our own calculator with like infinite precision numbers. Like you could have a number that is like really, really, really long, and you need to add it to another number that is really, really long, and you need to basically do the calculation. So yeah, they were teaching us basically like to make bigger projects, but also like to check the manual. So for example, to do malloc, you need to ask the OS to give you more memory, this kind of stuff. That's how you check the manuals. Same for printf. We were checking all the options and try to implement the options like %d, %c, etc., etc. And for the calculator, this was like at the end of the year, like towards the end of the year, because like we had 2 or 3 big projects. So the calculator was one. Then there was like a Game of Life, I think. And the
Yeah,
other...
it's, I think, a pretty famous game, I think. It's
Yeah,
mathematical game, right?
yeah.
Okay.
And maybe another one, I don't remember. But yeah, so basically this was like this, like from the very beginning towards bigger projects.
I think you guys were learning that structure and algorithms at that time. We can say kind of like that, right? Basically for solving this problem.
Um, so we never learned it, I'd say, we never learned it formally. Like
Okay.
we never had a professor telling us
Yeah.
like, this is an array, this is a set, this is a map, this is whatever you want. But yeah, because of experience, you start to like recognize what you need to use. Yeah, and the second year, so the first year was in C, and the second year was in C++. And in the C++, we started to learn about like more advanced data structures, like map, another map, set, another set, this kind of like that you don't really like, you don't have them in C. You need to code them in C by yourself. But in C++, they are already in the standard library, right?
Okay. I think it was a pretty interesting journey to start coding with C and C++ to understand every aspect of low-level programming
Yeah,
and even knowing how to print stuff, allocating memory kind of thing. Most of us like miss this kind of ideas when we learn programming. We just get to start coding like in React or in
right,
Node.js and pretty framework kind of things, right? So
right.
you have been introduced to basics of programming in which like it's a pretty strong foundation. So
Mhm.
how you got started to work with Go? Like I think it's to a C++ programmer or something like that, it's hard, and Go is a kind of young programming language. So how
Right.
you get introduced to it? And
So I think I got introduced to it. So my first year at university, C, then C++, and then the third year you can choose between different languages. And I quite liked C#. because it felt familiar, and at the same time there was some like interesting stuff to me. It was interesting to me. For example, I don't know if you know Link, LINQ, but it basically feels like you are writing SQL inside your code.
Okay.
And so you can say like select in this container, filter, etc., etc. So this was like interesting to me. And then so I did my 3 years in Epitech, so my bachelor. And then for the fourth year, we need to go abroad. And so you have a lot of choices. You can go anywhere in the world. And then depending on your GPA, you can choose certain locations. So I had a pretty good GPA, not the best, but like pretty good. And so I could choose like to go to US or to China, basically. US was a little bit too expensive first, and second, I thought the culture was kind of similar to France, and I could already speak English, so I felt like I could probably learn a lot in computer science, but outside of computer science, I might not learn that much. So I decided to go with China, and I didn't know anything about the Chinese language or the Chinese culture. Yeah, basically nothing. So I would say like I chose this to learn about computer science, but also outside of computer science. And then, so when I arrived in this university, at some point, we had a class on distributed systems, and this was in Go. And with my background, I thought I just cannot understand this language. The first thing that I remember like fixating on is in C and C++ you write int and then the name of the variable, but in Go you do the opposite, and I thought this was annoying, and I don't know, like it's kind of stupid, but like at that time is like I didn't know anything about programming, right? Basically, like for me it was mostly syntax, right? But yeah, after sticking with it, I finished the course. I passed the course, and for the next 2 years, I just basically forgot about Go. I started to write other languages, C sharp, C++, etc. And at some point, when when I met the CEO of Education for Ethiopia, and we needed to write a backend, I actually thought, you know what, like I might give Go another chance and write the backend in Go. And yeah, then after that, I just started to like Go and write more Go like outside of work, right? Like for personal projects, etc.
I think one of the things that make me amazed about Go is how it declares variables. Like I have seen the documentation. I was reading the documentation. And it says instead of thinking about C or C-like programming languages, let us just twist the things. For example, when you want to declare a variable, it you specify the type first, like in C family languages and most of the languages that we know. Like you say, okay, this is integers and there is a variable name and then the value is this one. Oh, this is pretty annoying. And they say, okay, let us twist it. So this is a variable, var, and then there is a num, and it's type of an integer, like it's type of an integer, and then the value is this one. So this much, they say like this makes much more sense, and say, oh yeah, like it makes more sense, like instead of thinking of the noun kind of C family languages. So it's a pretty new kind of philosophy, but I think I like to go for one of the things. Uh, there are many things that we are going to talk about it, but this is one of the things that made me interested, because it thinks differently, and they teach you to think differently instead of thinking the way in which the programming world has been constructed. You have to go outside and think of kind of thing. When I get introduced to channels, routines, and kind of things, it's pretty different from what you know
Oh,
of other programming languages and programming concepts. Are there things that made you interested, or you say that's unique in Go, that made you like more interested in going continue with it?
So I think like what made me interested in Go at first is gRPC. So how that got introduced is I was looking for a way to do like server client communication, right? And I wanted a lighter solution than JSON. So basically I found protobuf, right? And then from protobuf, basically I got the idea of using gRPC, right? Because this kind of like tightly linked together. And so yeah, like the front end was an app written in Kotlin, and the backend was in Go. And so I got more interested about protobuf and gRPC first, and then about Go, right? Because like if you worked with gRPC and protobuf in other languages, basically any other language, it's way harder to get started, especially if you tried with C++. It's like it takes so much time to set up, and you need to like be sure about what you're going to do, etc., etc. But for Go, it's like you just generate your stuff and you get writing code. You get to writing code, right? It's harder for other languages. So yeah, that's how I got interested in Go. And then as I started to write more and more Go, I thought, I mean, you know what? This is like a pretty good language. I'm like I can write code and don't think too much about a lot of stuff that you need to think about when you're writing C++. But yeah, at the same time, of course, like you don't have the same level of control that you would have in C or C++. So it's like a trade-off, right? But I think for backend, it kind of makes sense. For backend development, it makes sense. So yeah, that's how I got interested in Go. And then for the features, I think, yeah, so there is the Go routine channel things that are interesting to me. But I also like so I don't know the actual term for this, but basically like you have a type and it's implementing some member functions. And if they are implementing, like if
Interfaces, right? Satisfying interfaces.
they have satisfying interfaces. So if you like satisfying interface, it's just considered to be the interface, right? I think this is like really interesting because like if you wrote some C++, or like you need to like basically have the type after the class name to yeah, you need to define like your interface and then implement it, etc., etc. But here you can just like I have a type, I implement these functions, and I basically have an interface. I thought this was like a good idea. And so Go routines, channels, this. And for now, I think that's mostly it. I also like the fact that it's not using LLVM in the backend. So like, I don't recommend people to do this, but basically you can write your assembly. You can use like vector instructions and all this kind of stuff. It's kind of crazy, but I think like this is really interesting for a new language to not use LLVM, because like Rust, Zig, like all these new languages, they all use LLVM, right? But I thought this was also an interesting point.
This is very interesting. One of the other questions that I wanted to ask you is, what is the unique thing about gRPC that you like specifically? I think protocol buffer is much lighter than JSON, but having that is just like it's a unique thing in gRPC. But is there any other thing that you make you interested in gRPC?
So like I did some research, right? But I'm not an expert in communication between server and client. But I quite liked the fact that they wanted to like make communication secure by default. So like you need to be explicit about not wanting to use TLS. So I thought this was the good default for communication between a server and a client. And then the fact that they are using HTTP2, like they wanted to innovate on the HTTP like protocol, right? It's like they found these ideas that are not working anymore, and they wanted to improve the protocol. So I thought this was like outside of protocol buffers. I thought like this was the two main ideas. One is we want to make communication secure by default, and then we also want the communication to be efficient for modern communication between server and client.
I have never used anything other than JSON yeah, or kind of GraphQL things for API communication. So I have been seeing like the outline of your book, and that made me really interested in knowing more about communication between client and server, and even the things that we assume that we know, like HTTP server, how does it works, what is the basic protocol behind it, and how things are implemented. I think knowing things from the basic background and starting to know it well and build one of yourself, for example, like there are many courses in which you have to build your HTTP server from scratch, not just use the one that's provided for you by the standard library or kind of things, right? So in Go, I think one of the most interesting things about this community is most of them doesn't recommend you to use library outside the standard library, because I think before Go mode came to work, there was an era of using libraries by vendor or something like that, and most of them there was malicious attacks. I remember I've forgotten the name of the site specifically, but there was a site in which the users, it was serving as a CDN for serving JavaScript, but after some time the provider, the developers of that JavaScript library didn't have the full owner of that site, and the site has been sold, the domain name has been sold, and then the new owner of the domain name has decided to inject malicious JavaScript using his site, and since the site has been used in many websites for making them using CDN, many of the sites were down because of only this reason.
Mhm.
So in Go, they don't recommend you to use a library if you just want one function or two functions. They say like just go and copy and paste that line of code instead of having any other things. One of the main interesting things in Go community is this one, like you have to build many things from scratch by yourself. That will make you learn, and that will make you grow. For example, one of the things that made like is unique in Go is there is no hash set if you like want to use one. Have you tried that one? Like there is no hash set, right? In Go,
There is no, sorry, what's the, there is
hash
no
sets, hash sets.
hashet? Yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So like you
But
have to build.
you can just make like uh, like technically you can make a hash set with a map, right? You
Yeah,
make
yeah,
a map like int
with
and
the struct.
interface, or like struct or interface,
Yeah,
and you basically have a hash set, right?
yeah. Like most of the programming languages provide this for you by default, right? And you don't know how that, like
Right.
how you can be creative and use things like that.
Hmm.
Even yeah, many things like that. Yeah. So that makes me interested in Go. Like you have to build things from scratch, knowing things from scratch and building them. Even if you don't use them, like to learn things, it's good to build something that makes you interested. So yeah. So
I I
what?
think like Go is in this kind of it's a middle ground. So for example, you have C, where like C or assembly or whatever, where basically you need to rewrite everything. So if you want to have like a hash set, and you don't want to use a library, you basically need to write your hash set, like really understand what the hash set is doing, what's the storage like, what's the algorithm like, etc., etc. And then you have languages like Java, C sharp, etc., where basically it's so abstracted away. You have so many like collections, so many data structures that you can use, and you like if you don't dig a little bit further, you basically never learn about how they are working. And Go is kind of like in the middle. Uh, there are some basic data structures like maps, slices, etc. But after that, you also need to like dig deeper by yourself and try to implement your own stuff. Um, so yeah, it has some advantages and some disadvantages. Sometimes I just want to have a priority queue, and like I need to implement the priority queue. Uh, but yeah, I mean, it's good for learning and for being able to make trade-offs. So sometimes you want your data structure to be implemented in that way and not that way. Um, it's harder to do in like Java, etc. Because you need to do a class, it needs to implement this, it needs to do blah blah blah. In Go, you can just like implement your like how you want the API to look like, and it's basically finished. You don't need to implement anything. You don't need to like be aware that this class is changing the state under yourself, etc. And then in C is like maybe a little bit too much work if you want to ship actual projects, right?
Okay, like is there any things that you have implemented like this for learning, like starting from scratch?
I think the first thing I was interested about is implementing a map. So not a hash map, but a map. And so this is at the time where I was learning C and I was learning about linked list. And so like even without reading too much on the internet, I just like got the idea of having buckets. And if you have like buckets that have multiple entries, you have basically a linked list of elements, and you go to the bucket, you search for the element in the linked list, and you basically have a map, right? So yeah, that was the first thing I was like doing in C. Well, I did first a linked list, of course, and then a map. I think the linked list, now I don't really like linked list, but at that time I was like really impressed by just this idea of how we could store data, how we could find data, how we could delete data, how we could reorganize data, etc. So this made me think different about programming. Before that, it was mostly you take an input, you get an output. But here it was like we have an input, we need to transform it in this way so that we can make the output like easier to calculate, right? So yeah, this is the first data structures that made me grow as a software developer.
I think you have around 2 books, right?
Yeah, 2 books. One, I think I have them here.
Okay, can you show us?
Okay. So the first one was actually like gRPC Go for Professionals. This is actually Pact who like contacted me and say we want to write a book about gRPC. We saw your course. Like, do you want to write one? And my answer was, yeah, but like if we want to write about gRPC, we might also as well write about protocol buffers. And so after finishing the first book, I had like the second book on protocol buffers handbook. And yeah, so we wrote 2 books together, and yeah, that's how it got started.
These 2 books are like one of the most interesting books that I have read, like about communication and things like that. Like for gRPC especially, there are no many books, especially in Go, right? Like I think
Right.
this is the only book that I was able to find.
There was another one, but like after reading it, I thought like they are just basically like spitting code in the book, and they don't really explain like how HTTP2 works under the hood, like what are the philosophies of gRPC. They don't explain protocol buffers, why protocol buffers is interesting, why it's saving so much space, especially for some kind of data. And so I thought, you know what, I know a little bit about both. I can do even more research about the topic. And yeah, just decided to write the 2 books.
Okay, how you started writing the book, like outlining the concept that you were interested in. Like, have you ever had an experience of writing things like that, even in college or something?
Not really. So it was my first time to write a tech book. And I think like working with an editor is like way easier. So basically what they did for me is like they tell me, okay, you need to make the outline, and then from the outline, like you have 3 to 5 major topics that you want to cover in this outline, like in this chapter, in this subchapter, etc. So they make you like refine what you want to talk about in each part of the book. And what also made it easier is I already had my courses on Udemy. So I basically like took the outline of the courses, put them into a book, and then added the parts that I thought were missing from the course. So I think in the course I didn't talk too much about like the HTTP2 protocol. I didn't talk much about like protobuf binary encoding. But in the books I try to add like this kind of stuff that's like a little bit more theory for people to learn when you need to use gRPC, when you need to use protocol buffers, and when you maybe don't want to use them, right?
Interesting. One of the things that I notice most of the time is we like coding. Most of us like coding because it's kind of writing, and then you see what your code do, right? Like what is the outcome of that one.
Mhm.
So, what is the most interesting part of writing a book, like according to your experience?
So I think for me it's quite hard to write a book. Like you need to be really dedicated, right? Like you need to keep consistent, like, and try to write every day. Maybe not like one chapter every day, but at least write a little bit every day, so that like you get the overall idea of the book going. So it's kind of hard, but at the same time, it's like like some people say like you don't know something if you can't teach it to people. For me, this was kind of like this moment that made me realize I know how to use gRPC and protobuf, but at the same time, I don't really know how I can teach it to people. And writing a book made me like basically switch, right? Like it made me think about how I would teach it to people, what is probably interesting to people and what is not interesting, because you also need to like get your understand your audience, right? If you're writing for beginners, you cannot just like start by explaining the binary encoding of protobuf, right? It doesn't work. So it made me like a better teacher, I think. And so that's what I think is the most interesting about writing a book. It's like you need to think and like plan as much as possible.
I guess for most of your book, you were mentioning like you had a course on Udemy, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So like how you started having courses on Udemy, and mostly I haven't found more interesting courses than yours on Udemy about gRPC. I think it was in multiple languages, right? I have seen in Python, in Node, in Go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how you started like recording and making courses on Udemy? Like I think that also requires a bit of experience of teaching and explaining things to others and showing everything to others, right?
Right.
So how you started recording courses for Udemy?
So how it started is after graduating from my master um, in computer science, I wanted to do like a project. So my idea was like during your 20s, you can kind of like do a little bit of entrepreneurship, right? It's the time that you have the less to lose. So like try stuff. Um, and so at that time, I was already learning gRPC on Udemy. and the course was made by Stefan Malek. And so after finishing the course, I was like, oh, I can just send this guy an email and ask him if it would be okay to like record the course in C#. And so after sending the email, he replied like very fast and said, yeah, okay, let's just do that. And basically I just started recording the course in C#. So this lasted maybe for 2 or 3 years. I had the course online for 3 years. It wasn't making much money, but it's still like interesting experience. And then I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago maybe, Stefan, the owner of the other courses, said I cannot basically make my courses, I cannot make updates to my courses. So like, do you want to take all the other courses back from me? And the idea was we would share the benefits, and I would have to re-record every video and basically own the content, right? And so after that, I started to record like every day, record on Protobuf, record on gRPC in different languages, etc. And at some point I finished, and basically now I have like all these courses. But yeah, it's just started with gRPC C# at first.
Finally, let us take us a suggestion from you, how to get to go and learn things from scratch and be professional in things, and especially explaining things, right? I think it's much more important. Like I think Albert Einstein said the word, like if you cannot explain a concept to a child of 6 years old, like you are, and he understands well, you haven't understand that concept well, right? So
Right.
like, what's your advice to try to explain things to others and try to learn things from scratch?
Okay, so to learn things from scratch, I think you need to basically get rid of the fear. It's like for me there was always a fear about like I don't understand this is way too complex for me, like I'm not smart enough, this kind of like fear that we might have, right? When we are learning something new, you kind of need to get over that fear and start experimenting. So I don't know, like I don't have an example here, but like for example, let's say you want to learn how to write assembly, right? Because you are interested in assembly, you think this is cool to write assembly. Just start with the basics, right? Like start to make a function that adds 2 numbers is like very easy, and it's going to break that fear, right? At least now you are kind of familiar on how to write the language, how to link it with, I don't know, maybe you want to link it with a C program or whatever. Like it's breaking that fear. It's making you more confident about yourself. And then from that you go like a step above, right? You are trying to, I don't know, do a binary search on an array in assembly, right? You go a little bit higher. So I think this is how I learn stuff. For example, this is how I learned Protobuf, like the binary encoding of Protobuf. Is like I would just take Protobuf and then read the documentation and try to make sense of the documentation and see like in binary, I would print my protobuf, try to get like this part is the tag, this part is the type, this part is the value, etc., etc. So you start from this, and then yeah, you basically learn more advanced concepts. And for teaching, so I think teaching is harder. So it's harder because at some point, if you are in a topic, if you are really deep into a topic, you can end up teaching people stuff that they don't care about. So you are an expert and you have an expert bias, right? So when you talk, you say stuff like, oh, basically like the type and the tag of a field in protobuf is just like binary, like 1 byte, and they are using 3 bits for this and the rest of the bits for this. People don't really care about that. So, I mean, at first, right? At first, they don't care about that. So for teaching, you need to remember the state you were in before you actually learned the concept. So when you were a beginner, what didn't you understand? Right?
Yeah, basically you have to unlearn things, right?
Right. You have to unlearn things and like be aware that people might not be at your level. And then it's like you don't need to be like the world expert on something to teach people. When I started the course in gRPC, I actually didn't know about like the binary encoding of protobuf, and I didn't know about how HTTP2 improved the communication between a server and client, right? But at some point, because I stuck with it and I really wanted to learn this stuff, then I got the idea, I understood the idea, and then I incorporated that into my courses. So you can first start with the basics, how to use gRPC, how to use protobuf. And then once you understand more and more, you can either make another more advanced course or try to add content to your already existing course. So yeah, that's about it.
What about the job market? I think most of us have learned things and we have the skills, but it's hard to get internships and
Right.
even real jobs, right? How can we get in? What are your recommendations for this, especially for developers in Go?
Mm-hmm. So I'm probably not the best person to talk about this because I was mostly doing my own stuff for now. But I think there is 2 kinds of developers in general. There is the developers who are coding at a very high level. So they understand that you can make a website by doing this, and this, and it's finished, right? And they finished the project, and they are going to something else. And there is the other kind of developer, which wants to so they want to understand how it works. So they want to do a web page, and they want to understand I don't know, how to align stuff on the web page, right? So they are going through the documentation of CSS and try to understand like how this works, etc., etc. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. There is the need for both, because I think the first one is better at shipping fast, and the other is better at shipping more quality product. And there is a need for both, right? But I think with the development of AI and maybe the realization that we actually don't need that many developers to build the same stuff now, the second kind that understand a problem more deeply and is able to find answers more deeply is more needed now than the first kind. At least that's my thinking, right? And so I would recommend to learn a little bit deeper. So when you are doing stuff, learn a little bit deeper. Try to understand what are the trade-offs of what you are learning, and and try to like learn algorithms and data structures. I think that's my suggestion.
This was very interesting talk to have. Thank you for being our guest.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.